Okay, Pete Forsyth. Everybody please be very quiet and very seated and very happy.
Okay, well, speaking of being happy, I'm just curious, how many people here have ever edited Wikipedia? Look at that. This is a great audience to talk to. That's usually get one or two people, and they give me funny looks, the rest of them. I am basically here to talk about why Wikipedia is important and why Wikipedia is important to the future, and why Wikipedia is important to text. As a background that probably most of you know, Wikipedia has millions of articles. Literally, I think the English language edition, I don't even remember the up-to-date number, I'm not even going to quote it, but many millions of articles. It exists in hundreds of languages. I think it's close to 300, which is significant because if you look at Twitter, Facebook, most of the other big websites, they tend to be available in as many as about 70 languages. So, Wikipedia is kind of on a whole different scale in terms of how much of the world's population it can reach in their own language. It's been around now for just over 15 years, which in internet time is a really long time. When Wikipedia started, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't even have MySpace, we didn't even have Friendster. YouTube didn't exist yet when Wikipedia started, so it's really had some good staying power. And it's the number one most accessed reference work, compilation of original content ever, not just on the internet, but in our history. And the thing that I think is most important about Wikipedia is that it serves as a connector. And I think there's kind of a nice micro thing going on with this conference, in that the kinds of things that we're talking about in all the different talks that people are giving here at this conference, the way that we're able to connect them in a conference like this, in a symposium like this, is kind of similar to how Wikipedia is able to bring ideas from all around the world and make them digestible to different people. So, I think to illustrate that, one of the things that it was Oliver Reichenstein was just talking about was the markdown and the pleasure of working in simple text. And that's something that is always under exploration in Wikipedia, with the ways of using text in ways that are simultaneously easy to manipulate, but also produce results that are easy and pleasant to read. So Wikipedia at its core is text-based, which is kind of unusual for projects, for technology projects. It really values text very highly in its very composition and the very idea of being an encyclopedia. It's not that pictures and videos and stuff like that can't have a role, but the main idea is that we're forming a narrative around something. It's also very collaborative at its core. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people who have worked together around the world to build Wikipedia. And as Jane Yellowlease Douglas was talking about earlier, I wish that we all could, I think it's the University of Florida, where you're based, right? I wish that we could all be there and have access to someone like you to talk about, to learn something about Boolean searching. But we're not. We're all over the world. And what I've found just personally is that being involved with Wikipedia is a fantastic way to learn new bits of technical skill. For someone I'm not fundamentally a techie, I'm not a programmer, but I do appreciate technology when it can help me get something done. And working on an article on Wikipedia and working with other people is a great opportunity to say, hey, I was trying to research this thing and I couldn't quite get what I wanted, and they might show you something about it, and then you learn through that process. And I think what this all kind of comes down to is that Wikipedia does a really good job of blurring the lines between what we read and what we produce. So, the whole idea of Wikipedia is that it's the encyclopedia anyone can edit. So as you're reading an article, if you see a problem with it, if you see a way that you can improve it, you should have the least obstacles possible to improving it. Now that can get a little complicated when different people have different ideas of what an improvement is. If you want to add something and you don't have a citation, or you're just flat out wrong, obviously you can see that there are problems that come up. So that means that we have to be able to engage and talk things through. So I spoke at last year's Future of Text conference as well, and I talked at the time about 7 different different software features that have made Wikipedia work well. And several of those are about perceiving. So you need to be able to perceive that something has changed in an article. You need to be able to perceive what it is that changed very clearly, exactly what words changed before and after, who did it, and something about why they did it. And you know, I think the thing that I'd really like to emphasize today is that a lot of those features are really based in an idea of permanence, and they're really based in an idea of keeping things organized. So permanence, well, that's what we're here to talk about, right? We're here to talk about the future. Vint was talking earlier about, you know, sort of this concern that there's a lot of stuff being generated on the internet. We don't really know where it's going to go. I think any one of us could probably come up with several examples of that. A news article that you read a few years ago, you can't find it. You even have the URL. You save the URL, you go there. Well, they've had 3 different web redesigns since then. And they've changed their structure. Maybe they went from no paywall to paywall. You don't even know. Maybe it's still there, but its address is different. Maybe it's not even online anymore. So there are tools to deal with stuff like that. The Internet Archive is one that tries to capture information that before it goes offline and at least give it an address where you can get back to it. And Wikipedia is really another one. Just in the basic structure of a Wikipedia article, even when you have a link, you're supposed to give the bibliographic information for a news article or a book that you cite. So there might be a link to it, but you also have that information where if you need to, you can go to a public library, you can go to an expert in the field, and you might have more tools at your disposal to actually find the thing than you otherwise would. Also in the structure of the software. So every time there's a change on Wikipedia, there's a diff. So there's a URL that you can go to that is specifically about that change to the article. And you know, if Dan is working on an article, makes a change to it, and I have an opinion about the change that he made, I can copy that URL and put it in my message to him and say, when you did this, I think you should have done it differently, or I wonder why you didn't do it like this. That address becomes really important in being able to communicate about what we're doing, and also in being able to just think critically about it. So overall, you know, I think Wikipedia is it's a very good thing. Its value, I think, is apparent just in how much we use it on a regular basis. I don't want to suggest that it's perfect. I think probably we're all aware of a lot of the imbalance in Wikipedia in terms of the you know, the gender imbalance is very well known, that only a small fraction, maybe 10 or 15% of contributors are women, and that manifests in a lot of different ways. And I think a lot of the problems with Wikipedia boil down to the concept that Joe Freeman wrote about in a pretty well-known essay called The Tyranny of Structurelessness. Do people know that essay? I suggest you seek it out. I've got it, if you go to the link here, you'll find a link to it. But it's basically about the idea that a project that values openness highly tends to actually reinforce the imbalance in society. And so I think Wikipedia kind of suffers from that. But at the same time, I think there's a bit of a concern that the internet is sort of going towards a monoculture. So all the different projects that we deal with every day, they're largely driven by capitalist influences, by market influences, and a lot of the strengths and weaknesses that traditional institutions and traditional websites have are kind of shared among all of them. And the really important thing about Wikipedia is that its structure is fundamentally different than pretty much everything else you find on the internet. And so its strengths and its problems are different. So I think, you know, having some diversity in the information that we consume is really important. So I just want to leave you with one thought, which is, if you haven't, please, whatever your field is, explore it on Wikipedia. Get to know a little bit about what information is there, who's producing it, how it's changing, what was there last year that maybe isn't there anymore, or what people are working on. If you can work on it yourself, that's even better. But just, you know, as you think about how the information that's important to you is covered on the internet, make Wikipedia an important part of your evaluation.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions, Mark?
Hey Pete, my name is Marc Canter. If you go to Wikipedia, you can see my page. You can learn all about my famous grandfather, the American communist. So the page is being gamed by some right-wing people, right? I can't change or edit my page. What
Yes,
do
you
I
can.
do? Well, no, I tried and I was slapped back and said I can't edit my page. So
That's right. So this could be a whole talk, and I don't want to, I want to give it the surface skim, but our company, Dan, this is my colleague Dan Cook, and the company that we have, Wiki Strategies, we're a sponsor of this conference. That's really the main thing that we focus on, is helping people to work on an article about themselves or about their own company. It's not completely forbidden by the rules of Wikipedia, but it is challenging for reasons that
I got lots of citations. I'm well documented. Okay, we don't need to talk about my grandfather all the time, right? I mean,
so anytime the bottom line of something like this is that you need to persuade other people that your way of telling the story is the right way to do it, and there's an art to it.
I can comment on that. Thank you. So,
You might say who you are as you speak.
yes, I'm David Nordfors.
It's for the recording.
Thank you. Yeah. So that what Mark is pointing to is that there is only one truth in Wikipedia. There's only one truth per language, and that everybody has to fight about what goes for the truth, and you made a system for that. And I actually went through this myself. I had a page called Innovation Journalism, ran a program, we wrote about what it was. I did the mistake of having a username that was the Nordfors, while everybody else has usernames like Beer Barrel 455 and so on. So if you use your own name, you will instantaneously be accused of conflict of interest and get all the guys against you. So if you choose a name, make sure it's anonymous and that it can't be traced to you as a person, because then you lose a lot of power.
So this is a fascinating point. I'd really like to, I think there's several ways that you can go about something like this. I would actually argue differently. I would say that in respecting Wikipedia and what it is, you actually should make it clear who you are, but choosing a username that's your actual name may be a step a little bit too far. You may want to choose something that on the surface is a little bit more anonymous and make your disclosure on your user page so that it's not the first thing that strikes someone when they're reading about you. But there are many theories about this, and there's no right and wrong.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I deliberately have a short talk. I'm only going to make a few points, and what I want to do is seed conversations that go beyond the 10 or 15 minutes I have. But since it's short, I want to play with something that was spoken about earlier, ambiguous terms, and the term I'm choosing is AI.
Oh boy.
I developed an expert system platform in the early 80s and got an article published in Dr. Dobbs' journal about expert systems and the weather. And I thought, I really want to see this get into health. And so I phoned my personal physician at the clinic, and the conversation went kind of like this. I said, "Hi, John, do you know anything about AI?" And he said, yeah, we could do that at the clinic. And I said, "Oh, so you have a computer?" And he said, "Oh, well, yeah." And I thought, "Oh, wait a minute." I said, "You think I'm talking about artificial insemination?" And he said, "Yes." "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Artificial intelligence." And he said, "Oh, you mean like lawyers?" So we actually went ahead and he agreed to be the SME on an expert system. We chose headache and GI as our pioneer. And he came over to the house one day. I coded in the space that he had delineated into the if-then rules, and he sat down and he said, "I'm going to be a 76-year-old woman with blah blah." And he started answering the questions. And it stopped and turned the screen orange, which it was supposed to do under certain kind of diagnoses. And it said, "You've got a such and such." And he had a beer in his hand, and he dropped his beer. He says, "My God, it's right." And he says, I wasn't looking for that. I was setting something else up, but it caught that. So we went ahead and I allowed a woman that I know who had chronic headaches to run it, and it stopped the screen, turned it orange, and said, "You really ought to see your doctor as soon as possible. This isn't an emergency," and it listed a whole candidate range of it was triaging. And 6 months later, they pulled a benign meningioma out of her hand.
Wow.
They found it.
Wow.
So that's enough of that. What I want to talk about is literature-based discovery, and this goes to an awful lot of things that we've been talking about here already. I'm very interested in this notion of finding and connecting dots. That so the fellow that where I'm going to go with this. First of all, I need to give you the requisite quote. Carrie Mullis, the Nobel laureate who discovered polymerase chain reaction. The story behind it, I don't remember the exact details, but in his Nobel talk is written as it was a major aha moment for him. He apparently discovered the idea of PCR in his car, driving. And something out on the horizon, I don't recall the details, I think you can read about it online, it caused him to have this massive aha reaction. He had to run back down to the lab and start playing, and that's how he invented PCR. But he says that connecting dots means putting pieces of a puzzle together, and so that's what I'm interested in, and I'm interested personally from the idea of solving complex problems related to cancers. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm interested in weaving information fabrics. I'm really interested in this idea that between our machines, our computers, our AI, and humans on the web, and I'll talk about that in a moment, we can put together an infrastructure that allows us to begin finding solutions to problems that different tribes are solving in their own way, but they don't talk to each other. I'm interested in federating tribes. Tribes, silos, belong for a reason. But to the extent that silos can share their information, I want to use the web to facilitate that sharing. So Don Swanson, an information scientist, I'm going to greatly simplify what he did. He'd come up with this ABC model. If you have some literature if you have some literature in domain A that's talking about something, and you have a literature in domain C that's talking about something, and the question is, are there ways to connect what they're talking about? So you look for intermediate literature that gives you essentially the equivalent of set intersections of properties. So the grossly simplified thing is he was reading literature about fish oil and noticed that they referred to fish oil as a blood thinner. He was reading literature about Raynaud's syndrome and noticed that one of the RXs for Raynaud's syndrome was any class of blood thinner. But they never mentioned in their literature fish oil. So he, being the scholar that he was, he studied, he looked at the author social networks and found out these people never talk to each other. So he went out and asked some docs, would they try fish oil on Raynaud's, and they found out it worked. So he had united two disparate silos, or two disparate universes of discourse, and he, thus in 1989 with his first paper, talking about the ABC model, he invented literature-based discovery. So there are two variants of it. One is to take the A and the C and look for B's, and the other is to take an A, look for some B's, and see how far you can push it. And that's so those are the open and closed systems of literature-based discovery. Now, I need to tie it to the role to the text conference. I'm having trouble holding this up. there's an obvious role for text. It's to provide the means to convey the information, the stories from about particular topics. Did this die?
It's a bit, I'll just put it on charging.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Oh, it is better. Woo-hoo. Do I have to repeat my talk? But there are other roles, and these other roles have actually been touched on in here, this business about structuring. I'm interested in using text in such a way that I am facilitating the harvesting of it, both automatically through AI machines, but also for human comprehension, so that humans can begin to do this kind of work. So those are my key points about literature-based discovery in relation to text. As I'm very interested in finding ways to ask who are the actors, what are the relationships, what are their states, and what sort of processes those actors are engaged in this body of text that we're reading or we're studying. To the extent that we could learn how to structure our writing to support that, it's an area for research. Now let's bring in the social, and I think this is very interesting. You're going to hear from Dan in a bit about the Hypothesis Project, and it really fits into this. Dan is going to tell you about Hypothesis wiring up the web with annotations. And annotations are a first-order way to get into literature-based discovery with social. We have tagging. Tagging forms graphs. Annotations can be connected to each other through what are called coherence relations. If you could wire the web with coherence relations, you want to do this on whole documents and you want to do this on individual annotations. Humans are then part of the weaving of this fabric.
30 seconds.
That's it.
Questions?
Really fascinating. So, yeah, I got one.
Okay.
It's Vin again. Are there any instances of automatic discovery of this kind that you can cite? Or has it always been people taking advantage of their semantic depth to make these connections?
I spent a lot of time looking for those instances, and the only way that you find them is in research projects where they built a program X and it did all of these marvelous things, but program X was never documented. It's not been made open source. It stayed in some lab and it died. So I and several other people are working exactly on such
Trying
platforms.
to find a way to get there. This would be really fascinating. I love your term. This information fabric is a really attractive, resonant idea. Wow. Okay. So I hope this works.
Thank you.
So what you described sounds
Craig,
terrific.
can you just introduce yourself?
Oh, sure, Craig Cashman. So what you described sounds terrific for sort of seeing initial insights. But I would think to really get a body of research out of these connections, you would need to be able to actually get the two different communities to play together, get the two silos to actually really work together. Do you feel like there's difficulties making that happen from a cultural perspective? I know I come from an area of research, human-computer interaction, that's very, very comfortable with cross-disciplinary research. They kind of are built around it. I know a lot of other academic communities are much more comfortable with it. Have you found challenges there that kind of limit this from accumulating to its full potential?
So it's is this working?
No.
No.
If
It's a
you,
bit on and
yes.
off, just-
if you put it up close.
Right?
How about this? Turn this on. Just lean in. Thank you.
It's well known that
I'll charge you.
scientists would rather share their toothbrushes than their vocabulary. So Yes, I think there are social aspects that are going to emerge when you take on this idea of federating all human knowledge. But the idea is that even if they won't talk, there will at least be wormholes between the tribes, so that they can occasionally glimpse over and see what the others are doing. And I think that personally, I think evolutionary epistemology will force it on them. They'll just have to. We just need to build the platforms to do this.
Jack, I have a question. How important do you think it is to improve citations for this to be supported? Make citations virtually digital, not just copy and paper citations.
I think that that's a critical step. I really do.
It was a leading question.
I don't get much more time, but
You have 2 minutes.
my intent was to plant the seeds for a much larger conversation, because I could go on for hours on it, and I know there are people in this room that have forgotten more than I'll ever know about some of this stuff. So we need to make this an agenda item within the context of the future of text.
You're all aware of the Institute for the Future meeting tomorrow between 3 and 6, entirely optional, but if you can make it, to continue the dialogue, and of course we'll try to do all other media. The whole point of this conference is for you guys to meet each other, to keep it going. Okay, yeah, one more question.
I tend to work with communities within the intelligence agencies, the U.S. government,
Yeah.
and of course they are incredibly siloed, and by law are frequently, because of the compartmentalization laws of our security system, unable to share, and yet for a variety of national security reasons we must connect dots. Do you have any suggestion for protocols that could permit
Yes,
the sharing, at least in a machine?
yes.
45 seconds.
Can we do this at lunch or something?
Yes.
She's asking a very important question.
Give it a minute.
Actually, I have an answer to
Yeah,
this.
please.
This is actually a very serious problem, and there are ways of dealing with it in cloud-based environments. The whole idea here is you put all the information into the common cloud. You build the access control mechanisms at the edge. You don't show people who don't have the right credentials the content, even if you've discovered a connection. You report that there exists a connection, and you say if you don't have adequate credentials, you need to go to get them in order to recognize what that linkage is. It's doable, and there are some agencies, believe it or not, who are trying this out, and maybe we can have a discussion about that in another time.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Also, Maria pointed out that it's 2 to 5 tomorrow, not 3 to 6. It had to be that yesterday. Already?
All right, free Chelsea Manning. Bring Edward Snowden home. That's what I say. All right, so my name is Marc Canter. I'm going to be completely different than everything you've seen so far today. Okay, I'm a product guy. I make products. All right, I sell products. I envision how to enable people to be more creative and express themselves. And so my latest product, Colo Messenger, will be talked about, that I worked on with other people. It'll be talked about later on today. It's an awesome product. Please check it out. Now we're going to talk about what I'm doing next, because you don't want to sit around and be placid. There's something missing in today's world. These chatbots really suck. And we need to give them something that makes them more human. Thank you, Olivia, for talking about conversations, because that's exactly the difference between where the world is right now with this intent-based, goal-oriented, I want to buy something, sell something, whatever, and conversation, expression, okay? So the world right now is using these literally these chatbots have all this Easter egg thing. Tell me a joke, and the chatbot tells you a joke. And that supposedly is the personality. So the reason why is, of course, now there's all these chatbot tools. I mean, do you know that there are 20,000 chatbots for Kik and almost 20,000 chatbots for Facebook already? Okay, so that's the current state of the world. So what we want to do is bring personality to chatbots. Of course, cognitive scientists define personality as the thing, the traits that are underlying that cause you to actually do something. So probably don't have time right now to talk about how we're going to build this personality engine, but the idea is that it's based upon moments, okay? And we're going to come up with this authoring tool paradigm for enable humans to get at the potential of AI, okay? And right now, like I said, there's a lot of faux personality, like fake stuff. And what you want to do is dive down all the way into the core of a true cognitive engine. That's what we're trying to build, okay? And now let's imagine some celebrity bots. I've chosen two of my favorite celebs, Amy Schumer and Anthony Bourdain. So you're talking to Anthony Bourdain, and he's like, he doesn't just recommend a restaurant. He wants to know who you are. Do you like garlic? And what do you think about the French? You know? And based upon that, he's going to give you a different recommendation. And when you talk to Amy Schumer, well, okay, I'll explain how I'll interact with her in a second. Okay, all right, so let's imagine that we get these celebrity bots. They're totally expressing personality, and that's phase one. And then phase two, there's a plus sign. And you tap on it, and you can create your own personality. All right, that's totally awesome. That's where we're going. And the way I think of it, let me go to this and I'll go back to the quote. All right, so imagine this is like, we started with blogging, but we never knew where blogging was going to take us. We didn't know about, Arab Spring or Monica Lewinsky or all the things that blogging took us when we created this kind of automated way to publish, right? And then when YouTube launched, we had no clue that we would have PewDiePie. Or any of the other kind of internet personalities. So when I look at and I think about chatbots, I don't think about buying and selling shit. I think about what my daughters would do with this potential as a form of self-expression, right? So the key thing here, here's my poll quote, is that to create an authoring tool for a cognitive engine, first of all, you better have a model in the author's mind that they can even comprehend. The moment you talk about declarative versus procedural memory and how my chunks of data need to go in my modules that flow through my buffer towards my production ML and my feature engineering, there's no way anybody's going to be able to do that, right? That actually is how you do it. So we need a kind of a authoring paradigm on top of it. And again, thank you, Livia, to talking about the difference between this intent-based stuff and this kind of emotionally driven form of self-expression, okay? So here's actually the model where you have these authoring tools. You're gonna plug in content, 5 minutes, perfect. You're gonna plug in content, you're gonna give it context, again, credit to my friend Robert Scoble on context. And you're going to build this knowledge base, these relationships. If you do this, you do that, right? Now, all those three aspects get built into these things called moments. Moments are what the author wishes to have happen based upon a particular context. Credit to Adam, who I don't see here, but he's probably out building software outside. They use the term contextual path. So you take these moments and you plug them into different contextual paths. If I'm in the car, do this, but if I'm at home, do that. These are paradigms that a normal human can understand, all right? So I've got this personality, I adjust my faders, and the cognitive scientists have these standard ways of describing what personality is. Oh, I turned it off, there you go. All right, so you've got these standard ways of describing personality, these traits. And those are the underlying aspects of a personality, and then you have the things that trigger it. That trigger is the causality. That's when the moment happens. That's driven by emotional attitude. These are all paradigms that normal people can understand. So that's the idea of a synthetic personality system. Now, apparently no one's doing it. If anybody knows anybody else is doing this, please let me know. We're starting to build this, and I'm going to ask Vint to tell me about who's doing it.
So the answer is, at Stanford many years ago, there was an emulation of a paranoid called Harry. And we actually hooked Harry up over the ARPANET, this is pre-internet, with the Rogerian doctorate program at MIT, and we watched the two of them interacting. It was published in the July 1973 edition of Datamation, and it's also an RFC. They, I think, were not nearly as sophisticated as the structure that you've just described, but they were deliberately trying to figure out how to get the paranoid simulator to be triggered. This one was worried about the mafia and the horse racing thing. And it would stumble into that in the conversation. If it stumbled into that, its paranoia would become verbally apparent.
Right.
By the written exchanges that went back and forth. So there is a history of trying to do stuff like that, but perhaps not nearly as what we're showing you as grandiose as the proposal you have.
Well, okay, so, and our goal is, like, what our demo would be a slider along a particular attitude, right? So let's take raunchiness. Let me bring back my example of Amy Schumer. So at the bottom end of the spectrum, Amy Schumer and Greenberg, this is for you. Bottom end of the spectrum of raunchiness, Amy Schumer says, oh, that's really disgusting, right? And as you slide it up, she says, like, oh, my nipples are getting hard, right? And you slide up some more, it's like, oh, I'm totally wet. And I'll hold what the top level is. But the idea is that it's a synthetic personality. You can use external input. And the key thing is the data, right? We all know from our machine learning tutorials that it's all about this sample data that you hand to this deep learning thingy. And so where does the sample data come from? The author, right? The human being, who then creates this iterative feedback loop to train this agent. And so one person could have their sexy agent and their really boring agent and their parent and their, like, in other words, you program and train these agents to behave the way you want them to behave. Any questions over there?
So I'm building visual causal models using deep learning of decisions. So each link is learned through deep learning through a training set. So if your context is decisions, we have sliders on our models and interaction, and you can see them visually. So we should talk.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Another question right there. Here, use this.
Thank you. Craig Tashman, terrific talk, thank you. So I have two questions. First of all, are you sure we want much richer personalities in our smart gadgets? And the reason I ask that is because they're not really that smart yet. And I'm afraid you might fall into an uncanny valley where people see all the smarts and think, oh, this is just like a person, and then they feel really bummed out to realize it's still no smarter than Siri. It just has more personality.
All right, so dude, I have the perfect answer for you.
Cool.
That if you have to ask that question, this product ain't for you, right? My daughters totally want this. Young people see this as a form of expression, right? My daughter gets in front of a camera, and it's just a whole other world, all right? She totally wants to be able to have new ways to express herself. That's who I'm targeting.
Okay, so that was the second part of my question. What's the studies or intuition that leads you to think this is something that a lot of people want? It sounds like...
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm sitting there next to Dave Weiner. Netscape calls up, says, we got this subscription format. Why don't you match this together? Along came RSS, okay? We had no clue, all right? We released something called ourmedia.org the same month that YouTube went live. We had no clue. You ask me, do I know definitively? I'm going to tell you, my daughter gets excited. That is enough of an answer for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're doing the slides, right? Sure.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, Frode. I've got, I made a few mistakes here. I created this in Microsoft, PowerPoint, on a Microsoft machine, and my formatting has changed. The top line was one line, linking to the missing text. I wondered what other problems I'll run into. The other mistake I made was I misread the schedule, and I thought I had 15 minutes of talk. I have 10, so I have 20 seconds of slides, so I better get moving. I have never met Doug Engelbart, but I was here last year during the Future of Text, and I saw his video on the Mother of All Demos, and I shared it with many people.
Since you're so stable anyway, let's use that. Do you mind leaning?
Sure. Does it come closer or does it? Okay, I'll try to be stable.
Okay, thank you.
Anyways, much of my talk is going to be about the missing text in documents, and with that, I'd like to go over my presentation outline. What I would like to discuss is 21st century information literacy challenges, then discuss a technology I've been working on, and then a paradigm that can evolve out of this for scientific or learned societies. Thank you. Okay, the youth power browse. And this is an article on browsers and burrowers. And clearly, the easy access of information has changed how the youth navigate information. And we could ask ourselves, there must be many reasons for why youth power browse, and one of them is the easy access to expert level documents, and ones that they do not have the background knowledge to understand. What is the challenge is the implicit knowledge, the missing words. And E.D. Hirsch wrote a book, The Knowledge Deficit, which deals with information literacy and how to teach literacy, but let's take it in a different concept. And these 7 words here, in 1861, the North fought the South, probably means something to most of the people in this room. But if you had not heard of the country called the United States of America, or the Christian year, or any of the stuff in green, those words, the explicitly written words, would be incomprehensible. So the question is how can we provide the missing words in a document? What people do today is they browse through multiple documents, and the very few people have the ability to go through browse through the documents on the web and get the background information. Especially novice readers, and face it, we are all novice readers in one domain or another. So the question is there an alternative to search engines for navigating for the missing words? And the proposal that I'm putting forth is, can we use the lexicon of learned societies to provide educational resources based on the knowledge of those societies to provide the implicit knowledge? Okay, now the second part is on the introduction to the hyperglossary, and why in the world am I a chemist even in front of you people? And so my story might start with the MSDS hyperglossary. Raise your hand if you know what MSDS is. Okay, well, there is some implicit knowledge. There are some missing words here. These are material safety data sheets, and they're pretty important that we teach our chemists about the safety of chemicals. And these were problem sets that my students used to do. They would write definitions for the hyperglossary. These were pre-med students, and they needed to communicate to everybody from shoproom mechanics to PhDs. And then we would send them over to the demystifier that Rob Directory of Interactive Learning Paradigms developed. And you can actually take your MSDS sheet, run it through the demystifier, and all of the glossary definitions were now linked to the MSDS sheet. Rob and I, then I organized a ConfChem conference, which had been going on since 1993, in 2006, and we had a paper on the MSDS hyperglossary, and there were 3 other papers dealing with wikis, and we said, well, why don't we make a WikiHyperGlossary? And so we put one together that summer. We first demonstrated it at Purdue, and then we published it in the 2006. And this was a hyperglossary generating program with wiki content and JAS, or modifiable JavaScript automated searches. And it was at this point that I met Frode. I was looking around to see who else was doing some stuff like that, and he was developing HyperWords at that time as a Firefox add-on. I then went and got a grant from the National Science Digital Library to develop one of these for the chemical education portal of the digital library. And this is our flow chart. And there's a YouTube, if you just YouTube WikiHyperGlossary, I have a 3-minute YouTube that describes this, but this is is that clock correct? Do I still have, how many minutes do I still have? I may come back and show you this video if I have time. Okay. Anyways, what we can do is, what we're showing here is that we not only can connect the words in a document to definitions, but we can connect both canonical and social generated definitions, and we can use. Okay, then let's run the video because it is.
We're going to go over several aspects of the WikiHyperGlossary here, as with respect to it introducing me to cheminformatics. So I have a web page, and I'm going to get some further information on this web page. So what I can do is I have 2 options. I can either paste the URL or paste text in. I'll do both of them. Here I'm going to paste in some text. I click submit, and it parses this web page against our server. And if a word in this web page is in this dictionary, it comes up. So I can click on the word entropy, and the idea here is to provide background information on a document to enhance reading comprehension if this document is in someone's distal knowledge space. So I click on entropy, and it pops the IUPAC definition. And this isn't going to help the average person on the street. Statistical thermodynamics, the definition of entropy is S equals K on a W. But what we can do is we can add into this additional material up to 4 different fields targeting different audiences. We can put into these videos.
What's going on here is we're looking down into a beaker of about 1 layer of black ink.
And the idea is that once somebody has gone through a bunch of different definitions and stuff, they can get the background knowledge that they need to understand this document. Now, for scientists, though, we can use this in a different way. We could go to a site. Here's a site that's currently shut down by the government because we're in the federal government shutdown, and so the EPA site is no longer being maintained. And I might want more information on this site. So I could take this site and submit it to the hyperglossary, which I've already done here to speed things up, and it inserted new links. Now, if I click on one of these words, up pops an editor. So what I've done here is I've already clicked on carbon tetrachloride, and up pops a definition, but I've got additional tabs. So, for example, I can take this molecule, and what I've done is I've associated an INCHI, an International Chemical Identifier, with a molecule in the database, and that is interacting with an API, web API at ChemSpider. This will bring back information on this, such as boiling points, freezing points, I can obtain spectra, etc. I can pull up a 3D model. Now I'm interacting with the Models 360 database API, and I can pull in a spectra. This is an educational database. It's got things where you can set up vibrational modes and stuff accordingly. A very interesting thing I can do is I can bring up a 2D structure editor, okay? And what I had done a minute ago is I had taken the chloroform and edited it, and, carbon tetrachloride, and edited it into chloroform, and I could get information on the molecule I just made. So I could go over here, I could add a methyl group to this. Click here, now I send off a query. Up pops a new tab. If I click on the tab, we're now going to the ChemSpider database. We click the thumbnail, and I've got information on 1,1,1-trichloroethane. And this is what I'm calling a semantic, molecular editor-enabled semantic framework. Thank you.
Okay, and incidentally, since then I've connected this to the PubChem database, which has information on 92 million compounds and has 95 billion RDFs, which is part of the NIH NCBI library. So here we see a quick one showing you how you can have lots of different things popping up as glossaries, definitions to help provide the background information within a document. I'm going to move through these very quickly. Here we have a molecular editor-enabled semantic framework where you could ask yourself questions without ever leaving a document. But here's what I really want to approach now. Scientific societies have run into a revenue crisis. They're working on Gutenberg-era paradigms. Universities are cutting off subscriptions to publications. And can we move beyond the Gutenberg-era paradigm? Now, I'm a fellow of IUPAC, the learned society responsible for chemical nomenclature. We have meetings. All of these other learned societies join us when we have our meetings. And the question is, can we link the missing text through the lexicon of learned societies and connect the documents to the implicit knowledge and improve reading comprehension? But also, can learned societies expand their role beyond that as a publisher to that as a source for enhancing comprehension of the publications in their domain? And my dream is that when you go onto a search engine, you can click a button, and lo and behold, it will actually choose a glossary, but you can also navigate through multiple glossaries to find the information and recognize even things like automobiles. There are learned societies for automobiles, and that could even be connected to a parts catalog. And of course, my final slide is that literacy is a fundamental human right.
Wow, perfect.
Thank you, Craig Tashman. Terrific talk. So I guess my question is, at the beginning of the talk, you kind of showed Yeah, I'm sorry. At the beginning of the talk, you showed kind of rewriting an original, very terse statement, have more words and more details so that it would be clear to non-experts. And later on, you talked about the system morphing more into just giving people these wonderful sort of live citations. And I guess I'm wondering, I know for me, oh, did I say something?
No, go.
I know for me, that kind of hierarchical thinking of, have the very terse version and then just click links to get more detail about different concepts is hard for me, because then I kind of have to operationalize that linked concept really quickly and then bring it back to the more terse version and understand it. Can I ask, why did you guys choose to do it in the, sort of live links kind of way, as opposed to just expanding that original terse version with more wording, like in your example, or maybe exploring AI to do that or something?
First off, you work with resources you have at hand. Second, I'm not totally sure I understand all of your questions, but what you looked at here were actually an evolution of the project. The original project was trying to provide implicit knowledge using the lexicon of a learned society. But then we understood that there's a new type of text that's machine readable, like chemical identifiers, and these could allow us to talk to databases. And that's a new way of data-centric information architecture that did actually hardly existed when we started this project. So the project evolved, and the whole part on the semantic frameworks was not part of the information literacy vision of the original project. But it's something that I'm very much involved with, and PubChem may itself be offering this as a service in the near future.
That makes sense. Thank you.
One more question. You're just very thoughtful.
Actually,
I just loved your talk, and I'm wondering, when you say you're offering it as a service, are you thinking of completely different fields as well?
Well, that's the whole idea. That's the whole idea. The problem is we don't have the capacity to do anything. This is being run off a server of a former student of mine who is an assistant professor at a medical college, and at his house. It's being run out of his house.
Wow. Yes. This feels like, can I borrow it?
Carlos coming to the rescue.
Peter, you need to listen to this question. I just wonder whether it's possible to automate the absorption of the knowledge that's needed, so that instead of all the mechanics that you've just described to make this work, you have an intelligent agent which is conscious of all the stuff that has been accumulated, and simply infers that when you ask for help, it infers what kind of help you need. Just having an intelligent agent with all the knowledge that Google has accumulated so far would be a really fascinating challenge.
And if I could add to that, if there was a role that learned societies could have in providing that knowledge in their domains, it could help them survive into the 21st century.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Towards the end of my talk, we're going to play a game. So if you didn't get one of these cards, you can come up and get. My name is Valerie Landau, and
Are we going to use a microphone?
oh right,
Where's your
Thank you.
presentation? Ignore the man behind the curtain. Oh yes, it's on the, there we go.
my name is Valerie Landau, and I've been working with a group out of Barcelona, Spain, who's been looking at really transforming data collection and presentation of data in large groups to transform the experience, right, as a call to action. So, this is not downloading.
Would you prefer if I download it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, that's fine.
So this idea of trying to create meaning and trying to create a narrative from large groups of people about whatever the subject matter, to harness the collective IQ of the group by making all people be able to see the data in new ways. So, take 1 second. So the group started by started at this wall here. And they were tasked by the Barcelona Arts Festival to transform this graffiti wall into a community art project. So the artists, rather than deciding to repaint the wall with the expression of their ideas, which is the traditional expression of art, they decided to transform art and ask the community members questions and have the community members draw on the mural to create a collective view of how the people in the neighborhood were feeling. And they created this mural with the views of the people in the neighborhood. And one of the measures of success that they found is one day after they finished and they went back to take this photograph, a mother pulled on her mother's hand and says, Mom, that little circle is me. And so they felt like this was a whole new language of data collection, which is having the participants collect their own data and create info experiences. So one of the ideas of data visualization is to take the reality, and the perceived reality, and lessen that space. This was really heightened by a visit to Auschwitz concentration camp, where the members of domestic data streamers, who are mostly very young, had learned all about the Holocaust and learned all numbers and dates. But when they saw this actual exhibit of human hair that was used to make uniform, it transformed the idea of thousands and millions into a whole new reality. And this inspired them to really take on the task of transforming how we visualize data. So the bar chart, right, first appeared in 1781 and has not significantly changed since then, right? Yeah. And the other thing about the bar chart is here we have two charts. One is talking about where are Syrian refugees landing in the European Union, and the other is the temperature in Syria. And they have the same emotional value, right? So just the visual representation of it doesn't lead the viewer to the same kind of feeling that this does. So they started experimenting with some really new ways of presenting data. So this was at a workshop around dating and sexuality. And they asked participants,
I love it.
the pink being women and the blue being men, how do you feel about having sex after a first date? And those in the squiggly pile were like yes, and those in the straight line pile were no. And then they asked questions about people's sexual preferences and then served food ranging from using color, taste, temperature, smell, smell and flavor to represent different preferences. Then another key influencer in sort of developing a methodology was this exhibit by two homeless men. Which religion cares most about the homeless? Where they invite the participants to decide the outcome of this survey through sacrifice. My favorite is the bottom one, the 420 religion has the most change in it. Another example of this kind of data representation was at an international conference where they asked people, do you prefer to use a spoon or a fork? And also collected a lot of demographic information about the participants. So country, gender, age, status, height, etc. So this was actually one way to capture a lot of data about who was attending the conference by really asking them an innocent question. So it's almost a sneaky little data way and a beautiful way to visualize data collection, which got people really engaged to talk about the differences in cultural perspectives, right? Do you prefer to use a spoon or a fork? This was a way to monitor an exhibit, an art exhibit. So they were wanting to know which were the exhibits in which participants spent the most time. And so they put sensors in front of the art exhibits, and then every moment that a person was standing in front of it, 1 grain of sand fell into the pile. This was a voting mechanism, drip by tweet. So each art exhibit had a hashtag, and anytime there was a tweet, it filled these measurements. This was at California Academy of Arts in San Francisco, where they asked questions about people's relationship with nature, and red meant no, white meant yes, and then they asked folks to literally plant a stake in the ground of where they felt on a series of questions. Another example was this liquid voting. So it was really talking about the ephemeral nature of art. By casting each vote, turned it into a liquid drop, and then filled different bottles in relating to art projects. So these are seen, or this just new ways to represent and collect data that gets people involved in the conversation. And really, this was a conference where we asked participants based on their role to place themselves on the graph. So this gets to what I'm working on most, which is assessment of student learning in a text-based system that incorporates sound, graphics, and engagement. And so we took spreadsheets and created sonification. And so you see the music is playing, and that's each of these cards that you have a color at the top. It might be in a square. And so each one of those is one of the competencies. So I want you to raise your card when you hear your note played. And so the way this works is, these are the learning outcomes are in columns, and it plays from top to bottom. And so when your learning outcome is played, you raise your card. Oops. So the idea is they're being played in columns from top to bottom, right? And so it's going down like this. And really the point of this exercise is to bring all the people in the room centered and paying attention to what they're about to analyze. So it's a way to engage all of your senses.
That part I understood. I just didn't know what it meant to raise my card.
It meant that your note was being played at that moment.
So
that there was a correlation between this learning outcome, which is just called whatever it is, with this.
Wow. For a guy who's half deaf, this is very complicated.
Well, I'm going through it at lock. Normally, that would take a whole presentation. And that we also represent this the same data in different formats, and we allow people to see the data across silos.
So now I see that each card is different.
Yes.
I thought the cards were all the same.
no,
That's why I was so confused.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I understand.
Color on the top.
Yeah, so now I'm actually working with Lori and Pratt. We've just started working thanks to Bill Fenwick and Kenan for telling us that we needed to work together to add artificial intelligence to the back end. Okay, so now the emoji. Each of you have a
We're in
card.
your Q&A session.
Yes, I'm in my Q&A.
Okay.
So this is because this is the audience engagement part. So this is a new way of text, right? Texting now, emoji is a big thing. So now I'm going to ask you to engage in a conversation with me using the emoji. And Bill, I was hoping you'd take a photos from this angle.
Yeah.
From up here. So, how many of you feel that we need new language to represent big data? And if you put up your heart, that means yes. And if you put up the frowning, it means no. So hold on 1 minute while Bill gets a photo of it. So how many people feel that we need to engage people and make them aware of the collection of data and the use of that data and give it back to the communities to empower them to change? Well, thank you. That's all, and I'm now opening it up to questions.
Thank you. The stuff you did there was absolutely incredible. One quick question. Did you notice any patterns or trends in what caused people to be more or less engaged by these sort of new information gathering and information visualization approaches?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it depends on context is most what, so for instance, in this context today, I didn't give the proper introduction to what, why, how, we were just racing through it to give you a taste. So that would cause less engagement. So when you're really talking about things that reach the people on an emotional level because they care already, that's when engagement really happens. So we use this in the university all the time to improve curriculum. So before we start a meeting, I play this game. I play them their curriculum. So they've mapped their entire curriculum. I play it as a song. And then I start the question, is this what you want? I literally make them listen to their data. And then we go deeper and deeper and deeper into multiple views of the same information. And what happens is the group uncovers a shared vision of where they need improvement.
Valerie, it's Jellies Douglas. How well does this play with something, an accrediting body? I know how anal the ACGME and the AACSB and the IEEE are, and the CME. So how well does this play with how anal and narrow their logistics are for assessment?
Well, so because this maps, right? So we have this map, we have all of the, I didn't show you all of the capabilities, but we have every single learning outcome mapped to not only our own outcomes, but also the whatever specialty accrediting. And so we have a very detailed sort of spreadsheet view. When they see this, and they see the engagement and knowledge across the university that every single professor in our university really understands learning outcomes and how they're aligned, and they align them to their assignment. So far, all of our accreditations that have been some formal and some voluntary accreditations, we've gotten the highest possible reviews, and in fact, in the last 2 accreditations, we received no recommendations for improvement.
So, when you use different senses, it I get the feeling that there must be some brain science around this, right? Because if you use different senses, you kind of think differently, right?
Well, yes, so that's really interesting, the brain science. So the literature varies so much on what it shows that I haven't been able to find one theoretical model because I feel like all of them are valid and they're not unified. So I'm struggling from that all of the research around sonification is done for different purposes and each one has their own theoretical models. So NASA did a lot of data on sonification and location. But what I see is that it goes from taking a group of people to coming to a meeting and not being fully present to they bring their whole, they then bring, after we do the sonification, they bring their whole selves to the discussion. And it's the only time when our faculty seem to agree on anything is after we do the sound, because you know that academe likes to argue, right, as a foundation, but it's like once they listen to it, once they see it, they all end up coming up with very similar conclusions, and there's much less argument than in the semantic world.
Thank you very, very much.
Hi, I'm Brian Maggi. I'm with COLA. I'm one of the co-founders. And what I thought I'd do is, instead of talking about what COLA is I'd like to talk more about what it was or what motivated us to create it. And I use the term messaging, texting interchangeably a lot in the presentation. So when I use either term, I mean the same. It's just really talking about the idea of sending messages back and forth, with a smartphone and things like that. So one of the things we noticed, when we were starting out with the idea and the importance of messaging is that it falls into this kind of interesting place. It's in an interesting kind of continuum. It's not quite real time and it's not quite asynchronous. It can kind of be either or. And, from a real-time perspective, texting and messaging is like one of the best ways to get somebody's attention. It's also pretty tough to keep their attention sometimes. And from an asynchronous standpoint, it's something you can either respond, right away, take a couple minutes, or you can get to it when you get to it. And so messaging itself has introduced that new dynamic for people for communicating. I think that goes a long way to explain why texting has gotten to be so popular. And there's a statistic I quote that there's a Gallup poll that says that if you're under 50, people personally prefer texting as their predominant mode of communication. And I think that that a lot of us probably in this room would agree that they're probably using texting a lot more often or becoming their default channel. And this stat's a little old, but that messaging in a mobile data accounts for about 75% of the traffic. And so what that tells me is we are really kind of moving into this mobile first world. Where not mobile first, but text first world, where people are starting to use texting for initial, to initiate conversations. And because of that, it's changing the way people behave. It changes the way what people do. And so, as a result, some of the behaviors we're seeing in people is that, things like people don't just call you out of the blue anymore, right? They send you a text and ask you if it's okay. And sometimes that conversation literally takes place in text and you never actually have the phone call. Also, that, people are now engaging in multiple conversations at one time. A real common one is I'm at work and I'm still having a personal conversation with my wife or my kids. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with that today, people have the same technology for personal communication as they do for work. It's not like I had my lap worktop and my kids leave me a message. So the tools are getting to be the same, the channels are going to be similar. And the other is the last one, and I'm just being kind of tongue-in-cheek, as I call it the workification of personal, right? That's like, instead of gamification, is that people are what we also call social productivity. People are actually starting to use some of the tools that they've used at work. They're starting to apply it to their personal lives or to coordinate and collaborate with their friends. So, people are using calendars and scheduling, things like that. So, the lines are getting blurred back and forth. So we asked ourselves, we're thinking of COLA, it's like, what would the world look like if it was text only, right? If people started to eschew all their communication tools like email or phone, and yeah, we all know that nobody's going to give that up 100%, but just as a thought exercise, right? Think about it. If that's all you had, if the phone, your mobile device was it. And so some of the things we think about are, well, what's going to happen? So like predictions are that things like, group text, that'll become your social network, right? You'll start, if you look at group text, if you do them now, assuming people here, use it for group, is that those threads kind of take a life of their own and kind of live on. You go back to them, they start and stop, and there's assets in them like pictures and things. And in some ways, your group thread kind of becomes like this little CMS. And the other is that people relying on messaging and texting for communications, they're going to start to want to do more robust types of communicating, like collaborating. And it's going to need, a little bit better tools. And then lastly is presence and engagement. The idea that you get the impression that you're paying attention to the other people on the conversation. That'll be more important. And not that it isn't now, but more and more people will be aware that that actually matters. They'll actually call it that as well. And so with COLA, the idea is we can bring structure to this kind of quasi real-time communication that messaging enables. And I just have this small chart here to just give you an idea of like, telephone, you can talk in real time, but there's very little structure to it. Texting has some. Emails has very little structure, but it's asynchronous. And then, you have web forms and things like that provide structure and explanation of how to communicate, but it's not very real time. With COLA, the idea is that you can have these conversations, but present a way to structure things, or present structure. So why do we need it? So the first ones we talked about, things like collaboration. You need a shared space, right? The idea, if you're familiar with like the work of Michael Schrage, he talks about with collaboration, the need for shared space, because the lack of it means that we have this thing we call conversational ambiguity, right? When we're talking in conversation or text, a lot of times we're not really sure what you're talking about. Is it this or is it that? The other is presence, what I mentioned before. You're in multiple conversations at one time. How do you keep people engaged? Also show that their input, their feedback, and all those things are there, and that you actually communicate to people that you're talking to somebody that's engaged. And then the last one is that we have to move away from conventions to better idioms. Conventions is just the way people usually do things, or they invent stuff like cryptic TLAs and emoticons and stuff like that. But an idiom is more of a fixed expression. So we want to be able to communicate with better things that make more sense, like maps or radio buttons. So with COLA, just an example, the big thing we've done with the app is we have the ability to do text and things like that, but you also have these things like a shared space where you can literally interact with a message. It's like a little app. You can interact with it tactically. Instead of answering with text where I'm at, I answer with a map. I can tap on these buttons. So the idea is not only do people know what I'm asking, they also know what to do instantly. And then presence, the idea that when the feedback, when people interact with these things, comes back in real time. So, when people are voting or whatever their choices are, you see what the responses are. And then lastly, the idioms that I talked about was that, sometimes a map's a better tool to answer with, or, like I said, a radio button or choices and things like that. So, again, the idea is that by bringing structure to these real-time conversations, in many ways you're going to be able to enable people to be in more than one place at one time. So, I think I'm at my time limit. I think we've got time left for questions, or have I eaten that up too?
No. You have actually a minute more if you want to.
Yeah, let's see if I can sing a song or something.
Or more question time.
Yeah, let's do it question time. Yeah.
Hey, this is Lorian. I've built a few apps, none as great as this though, and what seems to keep happening is people keep falling back to email. And I wonder if we've learned anything that will keep people over here as opposed to in their email chain, because that seems to be a really entrenched habit.
Keeping people from going back to email?
Right.
I really don't have an answer for that. I mean, there are some people that don't even use email at all. I mean, I kind of have the opposite problem. I have kids that won't use email, right? Sometimes you have to send a text to somebody to say, read the email I sent you. So I don't, oh, sure. People, the other thing is, like, people should choose the channel they're most effective in. And I'd like to see more people just say, look, sometimes email is the better way to go. So, So
I think there's an answer for the old folks like me who still do email a lot. And part of the reason for that is that it creates a record that you can refer to. And since my memory is getting worse and worse, my email is my friend. On the other hand, there are times when you need real-time interaction. And so this is an example of a richer real-time interaction than the ones that we typically have. Mm-hmm. I'm watching young people preferring texting to other modes of communication. Email is too slow, and they don't know what to do when they're talking on the phone when there is a pause in the conversation. They are embarrassed about that, and they don't know what to do. They have the same problem with face-to-face communication sometimes. It's easy to not respond in a texting environment, and everybody excuses that. We need sociologists to help understand more deeply these different modalities and channels and how we behave in them.
I had just a funny anecdote. Is I used to have my own company back in Chicago, and I had several younger employees, some millennials, and I think they didn't get the concept of body language. Because I remember we were in a meeting, it was like 4:59, and they sat just, blank stare in the meeting, and about 4:59 I could all see them going like this on their computer, and I knew what it was. It was texting time, right? And I was like, when you're in a meeting, I need you paying attention, stop. And they were like, how did you know? And I'm like, it's called body language, Or like I would say stuff and they'd go, huh, and I go, get a better attitude. And like, how did you know? And I'm like, it's called body language, like you don't even recognize it. Wow.
Yeah.
If you, it's, I'll answer that in a second.
Yeah, that was my question was, sorry.
Wait, microphone.
Sorry. Michelle Kluge. My question was, when do you do something with the data, with the typing of the text, so that if you're talking about Britney Spears, you have options like here's a photo of Britney, here's a concert, whatever, or do you, if you say where to go, do you have a map that comes up, or what's your interface on the suggestion engine and all that?
Okay. So it's completely person to person. We don't do any suggestion of texting. We don't interfere with people saying. What we're doing is we're providing just an easier way for people that there's like no bots or anything like that. We feel like the idea is that this makes it just richer communication for real humans back and forth.
I have just a question to the audience actually. Ben just asked someone should study that. Is anybody here studying the different modalities or know anybody who is studying the different modalities? Okay, fantastic. Well, you're up next, so that's perfect.
There's also.
But not talking about it today, okay.
Particularly, but I believe.
So it is part of the group dialogue here. We hope to continue. Any other questions from the group?
Yes, she just continues.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. There you go. Thanks.
Do you want to start talking about it again?
Thank you, Frode, for inviting us visual people to participate in a discussion on text. What we're going to do today, Bonnie DeBarco is with me, we're going to briefly share a little philosophy, we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll talk about visual storytelling, the old-fashioned way, and then we'll look at the future of visual storytelling. So a little bit about me, I was a traditional news journalist, I have a lot of interest in text. Then I went through the Looking Glass at Institute for the Future and ended up being a consultant doing live visual journalism for various companies, organizing groups to raise their collective thinking, collective intelligence. Worked with, for example, top leadership of IBM, and also went to the Nobel Peace Prize Youth Summit, so I've been very interesting places. Am I good?
Podium because
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
You're not seeing me. The interesting thing is I came back to journalism, finding out that these big picture visuals were a really good way to tell stories. Along the way, I met Bonnie DeBarco, who looked at my visuals and said, some of these shapes are ancient shapes, and there's a reason why they work for people, and I had no idea about that. So we embarked on a project called Shape of Thought, looking at how different structures mimic nature and work on the human brain. So I'll let Bonnie introduce herself.
Okay, this is on?
Yep.
You hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you, Eileen, for inviting me to join, also to join into the project that she's going to be talking about today, and also to join in the talk to show how we're expanding the way that we approach it. My background is earlier in virtual worlds for universities in K through 12. I'm talking back in the way pre Second Life days. And so they were multi-user and there were huge communities. I also have a background in visualization technologies and am returning now finally to 3D worlds again because they're mobile and because I'm now working with large-scale, big picture images inside of those worlds, things to interact with inside of an immersive space.
And everybody will see that in just a little bit, make a lot more sense when we see it in action. Some people these days, have you heard people say, pretty soon there won't be any words at all. We're just going to do everything with images. Images are really front and center, especially for young people. What Bonnie and I are really interested in is the way that words and images work together to preserve
the meaning of words and having visuals as an interface. Very interesting earlier, Vin, when you said about words, when you look at the history of words and the changing language. And then also Jack Park said something, thanks Joy, about that. And if you look at the word text and the history of text, it comes from texere, the Latin for weaving. So textiles in the olden days actually told stories. So those patterns encoded information. And then Jack talked about weavings. So we really feel in a way that this is a way that of words and pictures going back, and it's so interesting we got together with we studied ancient cultures, and now we're looking at the future of text using these ancient ideas that words and text can work together.
So at last year's Future of Text, many people emphasized the need for context, the need for a shared container of ideas that really, or nomenclature, or terminologies that actually went across larger groups of people. Now we're much more multidisciplinary, and our communities are very broad and widespread, so that's even more important. And so working with images, working with a lexicon is, while people are collaborating to create some kind of artifact that is larger than them, that tells them what they think. So Eileen is going to show you a little bit about this.
Yeah, we talked about that. One thing about these big picture visuals, very simple. Stand back and see a big pattern, get closer and see the details. Very human-centered. I'm going to step back here and as I said, this is taking us back maybe to a new journalism. Maybe this is partly about the new text. So when I came back after starting to tell stories again with pictures, I decided, well, maybe we'll work on a really simple story. So I met Valerie Landau. This is history here. The simple story was, let's tell the story of Doug Engelbart's vision. So everybody who knows this story is laughing right now, especially Valerie. So I thought we'll sit down and do that. Well, this was 5 years of work, much writing, but we also did this big timeline mural. And what this shows is a way, as you see, there's words and pictures, it's put together in a timeline. And you take, this is Doug's idea, you can study this later if you'd like. His idea was, we need to co-evolve tool systems and human systems. So what we did here was to take many, many streams of information. We have a key for what those are, everything from psychology to technology, history, to step back and see what were the patterns. And Mei Lin pointed out earlier, we ended this mural, we had the big wave for the demo, and then we had another big wave for what's the future. And maybe that's what we're looking at now. So this started us on this path of using big visuals to understand and solve complex problems. And that was Doug's obsession and passion, was solving wicked problems. So this was our contribution. We're going to see how we can do that with visuals and see patterns. So we continue to do that with several other topics, and the latest that we're showing today is the history of women inventors and innovators. What are we trying to solve here? Nothing less than the gender gap. The statistics are ridiculous. We can't even talk about it. And why? And all the money being spent on it, we haven't been able to figure it out. So we're trying to go deeper. We thought, what if we tell the stories of brilliant women in the context of their time? So that's the visual part. We have a visual backdrop. And then we have people, one of them's here, Joy Montfort, and who everybody must know created QuickTime. So multimedia is due to, in large part, to Joy, what we have today. And I've really enjoyed talking to young people and friends at Apple saying, do you know who actually created this? Not really. So these stories are interesting not just historically, but also to show us the relationship between women and their times. So we step back, and I won't go into detail how we find patterns, but we find patterns and get hypotheses. Peter Norwood knows about this because we talked with him really early on. We're getting places. Up here you can see where we're getting. And please look at this because the key is very different. we found out that young women are not so interested in, I want to win the prize for this, they want to make the world a better place, often as a value. So our key is like activism for health and well-being, augmenting human potential, discovering the secrets of the universe. So it's about impact. So again, what did we find out? Oh, can we go back to that other screen? I'm sorry. Real quick. What we've learned is that from stepping back at this mural and having many conversations, is that changes, big changes in our world for women came about after there was a cultural structure around conversation. Quilting bees in the ag age, then in the industrial era, we had, they called them women's clubs. What they were really doing was making the communities safe and fair for people. And then we have Lean In, of course, in the early 2000s. We all know about consciousness raising in the 60s. That was a time when there was a big breakthrough afterwards. So when we had big breakthroughs, they were preceded by a cultural norm around conversation. So that led us to the question, what is the cultural norm today that might solve the problem? And we came up with a theory, which is that the future will be changed if we have a cultural norm around structured conversations between men and women, where they're very candid. So that's a hypothesis, it's working, and that comes out of this big picture visual work. So that takes us to the question, how can we scale these conversations? We've had a few of them in the room, like we are now, standing around the mural, but how do you scale that globally? That's where Bonnie comes in.
So Joy was speaking about the importance last year of having multiple forms of engagement to go into the text. So Mei Lin, during the process of this project, said, well, why don't you have Bonnie build a world for it? And I had returned to building galleries, and we're just going to show you this little video. We did it very quickly, a demo for you. But just when you watch it, it has a long history. Virtual worlds, their game, the game engines are now driving them. So the VR, augmented reality, and mixed reality are what these are going to become.
Bonnie, real quick, can I just say that this links to text. There's text behind.
Welcome to the online 3D gallery.
You want to take that? Do you want the audio for this? Or do you want to
Yes.
speak? Okay.
So when you're online, you can link to information about the eras and the women.
Welcome to the online 3D gallery of the Women Inventors and Innovators mural, a project of the Next Now Collaboratory. Using computer screens or mobile devices to access the We Mural Gallery, a diverse and distributed We community can have new conversations centered around innovative women in history. It's a place where women can dive deeper into individual stories, a place where they can tell their own.
The mural is a visual map of American life told through the lives of women who were changemakers, who gave voice, promoted human rights, women who were courageous activists and transformative leaders, women who augmented human intelligence and transformed the arts, women who promoted peace, the health and well-being of all communities, and women who encouraged the protection of Earth's delicate ecosystems and discovered the secrets of the universe.
At the bottom of the We mural, the portrait panel of dozens of women featured on the website follows along a timeline of eras and decades. Clicking on the name and icon on the mural takes the visitor to the debate graph of the innovator, in this case, Ida Tarbell, revealing her unique story. Ida Tarbell was best known for her 1904 book, History of the Standard Oil Company, the compilation of meticulously researched series she wrote for Mercury's magazine about the business practices and personal behaviors of the Rockefeller oil magnates. She also wrote biographies of President Lincoln and other nonfiction books. Walking around the gallery, visitors can experience the women's stories as an exhibition. Going back to the We mural, one will experience a richer visual version of Harriet Tubman's story, seeing her name and who she was in the timeline, then clicking on to her picture in the portrait panel a visitor will be taken back to the story walls. Brave, witty, and strategic, the former slave Harriet Tubman made history as a freedom fighter for African Americans and a role model for women military leaders in the mid-19th century. Today, she's making history again as the first woman to appear on U.S. paper currency since Martha Washington's face appeared briefly on a $1 silver certificate 150 years ago. The Wii mural, debate graph, and this virtual gallery each present a different way to visually navigate, communicate, and collaborate, to visualize stories and ideas through time and space.
Thanks, Bonnie, for creating that and for showing it just now. I wanted to say that this is a possible place for people who are really visually oriented might be engaged with text because they'll want to drill down more deeply. The idea is that the visuals are a portal, kind of a high level of abstraction. People see patterns, they get excited, they go down, but they have context, another text word. So text is weaving and con is together. So this is a weaving together that might help us connect our young people with information in a way that makes sense for them. And also, we think that the visuals and the aesthetics are important and that they help relax our minds so they can take in more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, got extra for you, Bonnie.
Just because there's two of us. Don't tell the rest of them. Questions?
Yes.
Where, do we have a mic over there? Where's the second mic?
They have.
Oh, you have. Yeah. Both.
Thank you. It's Vince Cerf again. You know, my first reaction, looking at the video in particular, was, gee, we're getting closer and closer to the holodeck. And the idea of sharing that space with someone else and exploring the same place together is very exciting to me. It also suggests that as I explore that environment virtual environment you created, it would be very nice to be able to pull up virtually anything on the web and have the parties who are together experiencing that together. In the Google Doc space, you all know that we allow multiple parties to be looking at the same document, not even necessarily at the same place in the document, but we can pull each other to look at something by clicking on an icon and drawing attention to a target. This whole thing feels like the kind of environment that we should be exploring further as a way of experiencing access to information in all of its forms in a collaborative way.
I really like that word experience.
Sorry?
Yeah, the word experience, yes, that we're giving a multi-layered experience. And speaking of that, I also want to acknowledge Ellen Loveridge, who helped create this mural, my young protege who couldn't be here today. There's a very good point, and I think that the idea of having conversations in this world is part of what Mei Lin suggested as a way to scale these cultural structures. Where do you have safe conversations? And we could create that.
Earl?
Well, one of the bridges then to text is there's actually like a whole art of narrative descriptions. There's WGBH, Jeff Fried is the one I worked with years ago, but that for the blind people, I mean, that's what we got to consider that communication too. So that's a huge challenge.
I'd like to respond to that, but also to what you were talking about, Ben. We did this around the world. Hundreds of people came together in the pre-Second Life versions of these multi-user environments. There were a lot of perils. It was, for chat, real-time chat with young students, but there was a lot of promise in it, and it was not cross-platform, and it was not available on the mobile devices, which every young person predominantly uses, and so we had big barriers to entry. And so in talking about multiple ways into the text,
I think music, sound, story that is integrated into the way that these worlds present themselves is also a really important thing.
That was amazing. This is working. In the virtual world that you showed, in the gallery, there was a kind of ghostly figure of a person. Is that how multiple people would appear in the gallery? Each one has a kind of a shadowy, ghost-like avatar?
Well, I can definitely speak to that. Well, in multi-user environments, we had avatars, but they were context-centric. We could do a lot of educational things in the 90s, throughout the early 2000s. When Second Life came, it was very avatar-centric. You first got an avatar, you bought your clothes, your hair, and it was much too different in terms of what context you could create. And so we had, we did have a problem for this period before these new galleries, which are based on, well, this one's based on Unity, which is a very, it's an open source, mostly used for making apps that are games, which our young boys are always playing. I don't know if I finished thought here, but
I thought the concept of having just a kind of a shadowy figure as an avatar is very interesting because
right. And that is because of the scale. So those appear, just to give you that scale, and that's the other huge thing, is these are large scale environments in the real world. They're also large scale in the virtual world.
The idea is just to recreate the live experience where, and you could show it in there where you're moving up and back in relation to something that's the size of a person.
Thank you very much.
And can we